Hello everybody, Alan Stout here from the Music on the Menu radio show, doing another podcast from home. Done a couple of them now over the last couple of weeks. I did one on the new Elvis Presley movie, Elvis Presley live in concert, epic, and I did one on We Are Not Alone, the show that the Breaking Ben guys did down in Northumberland about a week and a half ago. Tonight I'm talking to you about the 50th anniversary of one of the most important albums of the 70s, in my opinion. One of the most important albums in my life. And for an entire generation of kids that grew up at that time, really one of the most important albums in our lives, and an album that still means so much to us. And I'm talking about Kiss Destroyer, released on March 15th, 1976, 50 years ago. I saw some posts on some fan sites about it, and also on their official page. They did a nice little thing about it, and I thought I'd talk to you about it too. And I have to say that doing a podcast like this, where you just sort of verbalize a commentary, editorialize, is fun. For me to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write something about the 50th anniversary of Destroyer. Well, in my old newspaper days, that may have been a couple of hours of my time. And today, people, they like podcasts and they like digital, and so I might not speak as eloquently as I would if I was crafting an article for several hours, but I will share the same ideas that I did, and I'll just talk. And so let's talk about Destroyer. What an incredible record. Probably, Kiss has a lot of records. I mean, they have a lot of records. They made records from 1974 up until about 2012. And sometimes they put out a couple a year. And so for a band that so many people name this as their favorite Kiss album, myself included, that says a lot. Let's give it some context of when it came out in March of 76. So the band has released at that point 3 studio albums. Kiss, their self-titled debut, Hotter Than Hell, which came out in 74, both of those records. 75, they released Dress to Kill, and they get a hit with Rock and Roll All Night, the studio version. And then they drop the bomb with Alive. And that is the album that breaks them through commercially. And when you think about it, and you look at history, as they say, it sounded like such a long haul that, but it really wasn't that much time. The first record comes out in early 74, and a year and a half later, the end of 75 or so, 2 years, they're a pretty big band. But it was such hard work. They made 3 studio albums. They toured so much. And so to have it all sort of culminate with Alive, which is really what Kiss is all about, is the live show. It was probably exactly how it should have happened, and probably the only way that it was going to happen. However, to follow up Alive, I think they knew they needed something special. And it was the first studio album, you have to remember, that people were now anticipating. A lot of people. Now they were a big band. And now they're going to put out a new album. And they're on the radar. And everybody knows who they are. Teenagers, anyway. Not little kids yet, and I'll get to that later. And so, what do? They bring in Bob Ezrin. The great, great Bob Ezrin. A masterful producer. He had done the great work already with Alice Cooper. He had done some stuff with Aerosmith. He would later go on to produce Pink Floyd's The Wall. if you look up his Wikipedia, Bob Ezrin, Ezrin, for those who might not be familiar with Bob, absolutely a brilliant move by Kiss and by their management at the time, their record label Casablanca, to decide that they're going to take this band, who at this point, and let's not have revisionist history here, at this point, Kiss is a pretty tight band. They are good players. They have been playing and touring for a couple of years non-stop. And so this notion that they were still kind of novice with their instruments earlier in their career, I've never bought into it. Watch some of the stuff they did on the Midnight Special in 1974, 75. I think they're doing She. And they are as tight as a dime. They are a really good band. Take away the makeup and the presentation, the outfits and the smoke, the flash pods, and the glitzy logo, and they are still. If you saw that band in a bar playing those songs, you would say, "Man, these guys are tight." But still, to go in and work in the studio with Bob Ezrin, as they would all say later in the books that they wrote, was like going to boot camp. This guy is a taskmaster. This guy wants perfection. This guy's a visionary. There's a difference between a producer and an engineer, a big, big difference. The engineer, Eddie Kramer, who a lot of Kiss fans like, I think is a great engineer. And if you want to harness your sound and record multi-track recording and get it to sound really, really good, like Rock and Roll Over album that he did with Kiss, or some of the solo stuff that he did with Ace, or with Alive, then Eddie's your guy. But if you want to take maybe things up to another level that's beyond your own talent, you want to push the envelope, then you want Bob Ezrin. Because he's gonna pick up an instrument. If there's something that he thinks the song could use and you don't know how to play it, he'll play it. He's going to help you write the song. If you're stuck on a bridge, he'll help you with that. He has that talent. I've here in northeastern Pennsylvania, I've had the privilege of working with Brett Alexander in the recording studio. Brett's the most respected producer in our region. And I've seen what he can do. I've written songs, and I've given Brett the demo. And what I gave him on the demo was mine. It was my lyrics, and it was my melody. And when I listen to the finished recording, I still feel ownership of it. However, it is much, much better than it would have been if I just recorded what I had and I not asked him to put his stamp on it. That could be with the arrangement. I've told this story a couple of times with my song Summer Days, which I released back in the 2003. It was Brett's idea to start that song with the chorus. He liked the chorus. He goes, "I think we're going to start this with the chorus." I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, the Beatles did it all the time." And so to get it back to Kiss with a producer, I just know if you listen to those first 3 Kiss albums, which we love the first record, love Dress to Kill, love Harder Than Hell. But if you listen to the grandness of Destroyer, that is all Ezrin. And so the choir that he brings in at the end of Great Expectations, the soundscapes that you hear within God of Thunder, the building of the chorus and the little grand piano that you hear at the end of, in the mix on Shout It Out Loud, the epicness of Detroit Rock City, the grandness of Flaming Youth. That's Ezrin. And I think that he helped that band jump 5 years in talent by working with him on that album for just those couple of months that they did. I don't think Peter Criss ever drummed better in his life. Listen to Pete on Detroit Rock City. He sounds incredible. Listen to, the the way that Paul Stanley starts to sing, and Paul at that point was just scratching the surface of what he can do. He probably really started to get there on his solo album 2 albums later. And then with Dynasty, of course, he's doing falsetto stuff on I Was Made for Loving You. And then through the 80s, he was shattering the chandeliers, singing so high. But Destroyer, he starts to maybe have a little more grandness to his voice, just a little bit on something like Shout It Out Loud. Gene's bass playing. Listen to that thumping on Detroit Rock City. It's so grand that it took them to a different place. And of course, the center of it all, the thing that really makes the album different, the thing that really made the album so incredibly successful, was Beth. Beth is a song that, Peter Criss had some lyrics to. There's a story that it was originally called Beck, and Gene Simmons said it sounds like Jeff Beck. Why are you singing about him? And some funny stories like that. Who knows what's true? But the song, the theme of the song is cool. It's about a guy in a band, and they're working really hard, and they're practicing, and they're rehearsing, recording, and his wife or his girlfriend is home alone waiting for him. And he understands that that's hard because I got to do this job. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. You don't have to be a musician. If you're somebody, a man or a woman, that works some 12-hour days, and you come home and, your significant other might already be in bed, and you saw them when you walked out the door in the morning. Well, it's kind of what Beth is about. Having people in your life that could understand that. I try on these podcasts to be a little bit more personal than I would on the radio show or certainly if I was writing. But I do those Rock in the River concerts every summer at the Millennium Circle. And I've been overseeing them now for about 5 years. And they're long days. I'm gone from about 7:30 in the morning until about 11 o'clock at night. I lose 5 pounds every show because I'm walking around that Millennium Circle all day long in sometimes 90-degree heat. And there's no place in the world I would rather be. There's nothing else that I would rather be doing. But I remember a couple of years ago, I came home after one of those really hot days, 90, 95 degrees, and my girlfriend at the time just had a cold gin and tonic with the ice in it sitting for me, waiting there on the coffee table when I got home. And that's kind of what you want Beth to do when you're out there doing your thing. Or women, the same thing, your husband to do for you, or your girl, or your boyfriend. And so, but, you could hear that song on an acoustic guitar and it would still be a pretty song. But listen to what Ezrin did, bringing in, the orchestration. I don't think that the guys in Kiss play one note on Beth. I think that was all people he brought in, Ezrin, to make it what it is. Peter Criss sings it. And that's okay. I mean, that's not that unusual for some records to have some people come in and fill some things out. Obviously, when they went on stage and they played Beth live, the other guys would leave the stage, and Peter would come out and sit in front of the crowd on a stool and sing it to a tape of the recording. And so it was something that was different. It was something that helped them cross over. The song hit the top 10. I think I peaked at number 7. And everything with Kiss and the album and even the artwork on it is so great. But everything is kind of gaining steam in the fall of 76. So the record comes out in the spring. They're touring in the summer. They're putting out some singles, but they don't put out Beth until August. And it immediately starts to get some traction. I think it may have even been the flip side of one of the other songs. And it was one of those great old radio stories where the DJs liked the flip side more. I'm quite certain that that's what happened with Beth. So that by October of 76, it's in the top 10. And this is when my memories of Kiss really start to take shape. And I think there's a lot of people from that generation, Gen Xers, that can relate to this. You heard about Alive a little bit. I remember my friend's brother playing it up in his room, and I guess that would have been in some point in late 75. And I remember Cold Gin particularly, and the how many people like a little taste of alcohol, and the Paul Stanley rant and the crowd chanting Cold Gin. I have a very distinct memory of hearing that up in my friend's brother's room in South Wilkes-Barre. However, it wasn't registering with me yet. Everything starts to register around the time that Beth is taking off and Destroyer is taking off. And that is all coincides with Halloween. I remember a couple of my classmates, I was in 4th grade, came to school for our Halloween parade dressed, and these were girls, by the way. Georgianne Russett, an old, still a friend of mine, and Tina Ritzik. Anybody from Valley West might know those girls. They came to school dressed as Kiss for the parade for Halloween. The Paul Lynde Halloween special, which airs a couple days before Halloween, 76. That's the moment. That's it. For Generation X, for a lot of us, that is our Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show moment. That is the wow. I remember my late mother, telling me, you should watch this show. This band Kiss is on. They're crazy. They wear makeup and stuff. They're going to be on this show, Paul Lynde show. I knew Paul Lynde, I guess, from the Hollywood Squares. I probably even knew who he was by then. And they were dazzling on Paul Lynde. They're pushing the Destroyer album. And they had everything down. The characters were, everything was now more than 2 years in. And that tour was the first time I think they really started having some real money. And so they start, amping things up a little bit. Of course, Love Gun was the pinnacle, I believe, of the 70s stage show. So we're still about a year away from that. But everything is really starting to go with Destroyer. And I give so much of the credit to Ezrin, who they would work with again on music from The Elder, the most polarizing Kiss album. Some people absolutely adore it. They really do, including me. And then there are some that think it's the worst thing they've ever done. Musically, it's brilliant, whether you like the concept or not. The production is incredible. I like the idea that they did a concept album. Of all the records they've done, and some of them are just, Kiss sings a lot about life and individuality and believing in yourself and self-empowerment. That was a theme of a lot of their music in the 80s. A lot of their stuff is about women, and I don't have a problem with that. And partying, which, when you're younger is cool too. But to have one album out of however many they've released, 30, I don't have a problem with them having taken a shot at something like that. And I love that record, and I love what Ezrin did on that record. And, of course, Revenge. And when we first heard God Gave Rock and Roll to You, when it was on the Bill and Ted soundtrack in 91, and people heard that Kiss was working with Ezrin again, you immediately heard Ezrin. God Gave Rock and Roll to You, Kiss's version of it, is incredible. And it's grand, it's explosive, the production is booming, and the vocals are that breakdown section in the middle where they harmonize. That's all Ezrin's touch. And they had such a great experience working with Bob again that they worked with him on the Revenge album, which is also some people's favorite Kiss album. And so there seems to be a pattern here. And, just looking back on it, to try. I'm sitting here in my bar where I do a lot of these podcasts, and when you come down the stairs to my bar from the upstairs, one of the first things you see is a framed poster of Destroyer. And then I have all of my ticket stubs framed from the reunion tour, the 1996 Alive Worldwide Reunion Tour. And the artwork that Kiss used for the posters on that tour in 1996 was from Destroyer. It's from 1976. I'm sitting here right now looking at my vinyl album. Destroyer was my second Kiss record. I got Rock and Roll Over first, and not long after the Paul Lynn Halloween special. And then I went back shortly thereafter and picked up Destroyer. And it just immediately became one of my all-time favorite albums. I love everything about it. I love Detroit Rock City. I love Shout It Out Loud. I love God of Thunder. Great stories behind these songs, too. You know, Paul Stanley wrote God of Thunder for himself, really. He wasn't thinking about giving it to Gene. There's a demo out there, which is on one of the Kiss box sets, of Paul singing it. But he gave it to Gene eventually because he realized it fit him so perfectly. I'm sure Ezrin had something to do with that too. And it is now one of the most signature moments at a Kiss concert, is Gene Simmons flying up to the rafters and pumping his fists and getting all the crowd and churning. That's a churning song. But I always enjoy watching Paul play it too. You know, when you go to the shows, you watch. Oh, I have to put this in the past tense. When you went to the shows, that's still hard, folks. I was at the last show at the Garden in 2023, so I know we're not going to see it again. But when you went to the shows, obviously that was a center point in the concert for Gene. But I used to kind of just watch Paul a little bit play it too, because he loves playing that rhythm, because that's chunky and that's just a great riff. And, you know, they didn't play it in the 80s. They brought it back in 1990 on the Hot in the Shade tour. And that was the first time they had played it in a long, long time. Probably since Dynasty. And man, what a great song live. I remember at Madison Square Garden on the reunion tour, I went 3 nights. They played 4. I was there for 3 of them. I was there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they were doing Shout It Out Loud at the end of the show. It had been an encore or towards the end. And they turned the house lights on. And you see 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden just losing their minds. People looked like they were standing on their chairs in the top balconies of the upper tiers, you know, the furthest away you could possibly be from the stage, just absolutely losing their minds to that song. And so, you know, there's such great memories. Kiss fans know this too. For many years, whenever they were about to drop a new record, and they were doing the interviews in the Circus and Hit Parader and all the magazines that we all used to love so much, I can't tell you how many times Paul would say, well, it reminds me a little bit of Destroyer. I think it'll be our best record since Destroyer. He said that all the time. And of course it never was. I think the first time I heard him say that was Crazy Nights. And Crazy Nights has some great songs on it. I love Reason to Live, and I love Good Girl Gone Bad, Thief in the Night. But other than having Ron Nevison produce it, who was also a producer's producer, it doesn't sound like Destroyer. And so they really haven't ever done anything quite like Destroyer. And they probably never will. They probably should have known maybe that they never would again, because it was a moment. It was a moment in time. It was a band coming into its own. It was a band that was ready to take the next step. They had arrived with Alive, and now was the chance to even prove it more, that hey, now we can also make a great studio album packed with great songs, and we could have a big hit on that album. From that album, it's not going to be anything like you were expecting either. And they did all of that with Destroyer, and they captured our hearts with it, and they captured our imaginations with it, and it's still to this day one of our generation's favorite favorite records. And I just thought I would be remiss if I didn't spend a little bit of time here tonight talking about it and how much it's meant to me and how much it's meant to Kiss fans and how much it even means to the people working in the office today. And you'll still hear Beth come on, sandwiched in between songs that you would normally not hear Kiss played in between. And of course the grandness too. Detroit Rock City, Shout It Out Loud, God of Thunder, King of the Nighttime World. Used to have this tradition with my friend when we were in high school where we go cruising in his car. He was the first one to drive. And we would just go driving around because it was just such a fun new experience to go in an automobile and do whatever we wanted to do. And we'd do all the typical Wilkes-Barre stuff, cruise the square and just drive around, and we'd listen to Kiss. But we always ended our night when it was time to go home with King of the Nighttime World, because that's how we felt. We felt young and we felt vibrant and we felt like, we just felt like nothing could stop us. And that's sort of the energy that you got from Destroyer. Flaming Youth. Can't believe I forgot to mention Flaming Youth before. That's exactly what Flaming Youth is about. Flaming Youth is about energy. It's about vibrancy. It's about being young and being very aware that you're young and you've got the world right in your grasp. And there's nothing that you can't do or take on. We got that stuff from Kiss. A lot of us did. And they would continue that in the 80s with songs like King of the Mountain and I've Had Enough and Trial by Fire and Get All You Can Take. But that all really, I think, really started to take shape with Destroyer and songs like Flaming Youth. So cheers to one of the greatest records that I've ever owned. Cheers to one of my favorite records that I've ever played. It'll always be a part of my collection. It'll always have a special place in my heart. And I know it'll have a special place in the hearts of the millions of other people that have made it one of the best-selling Kiss albums of all time, as it should be. Happy 50th anniversary, Kiss Destroyer. We'll catch you next time.